everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew. Today I'm going to be doing something new on my channel that I've thought about doing for a long time, but somehow it's just never happened. Sometimes it's hard to dive into new ideas. You think, is anyone going to like this? Is anyone going to watch? But today we're putting all those thoughts aside and jumping on in. And so here's the idea. I'm calling this DIY diagnosis, where I go thrifting, I come back to you with what I think are my best finds of the day, and I share with you what I would do to incorporate these into a space. Whether it's just how I would style them, or if it's a full-blown DIY thrift flip, how would I take these possibly questionable items and make them cool? I wanted to try out this format for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you've watched any of my thrifting content, I've talked about how I have a lot of stuff in my space now. I have most of the furniture and accessories and things that I need for my home, and I already have tons of unfinished projects, so I'm not really looking to take on any new projects. However, I still go thrifting a lot because I love it and because I'm looking for a few specific items, and every time I go, I look at certain things and think, wow, that would be so cool for someone. Not for me, but for someone. And one of the things that I hear a lot in the comments on my channel is that you guys really appreciate my ideas for taking sort of unlikely things and turning them into something really beautiful. And so I thought if I could provide you with some ideas about what I would do with certain things without actually having to fully do it and show you, that it might be helpful if you have a similar item at home already, or if you come across a similar item in a thrift store. This is something that I've been doing casually for a while as a part of my job at the REISSUED store. I do a lot of social media for them, and I love to jump on the Instagram and Facebook stories and share items that I think are really cool in the store. I love to talk about how I would incorporate them into a space or how I would revive them with some DIY magic. So keep on watching. Let me know what you think of this video. If you get to the end and you decide that you like it, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more content like this. I have some ideas about how to expand on this video style, so if you like this, be sure to let me know. I can't wait to show you what I found in my thrifting journey and to put on my DIY doctor lab coat and tell you how I would make these items work. Let's jump on in. So, I went thrifting several days ago and I hit up a couple of Goodwill locations. I've been doing some thinking about some of the really cool items that I found and how I would put the reissued stamp on them. Let me show you what I found. The first thing that I found was this really amazing antique hall tree. I've been thinking about something like this for my entry, partly because it gives a nice vintage vibe, and also it's really pretty practical in a space. This one is a little bit smaller than what I'm wanting for my space, so it wouldn't work for me, but at the $30 price tag, this is a steal. However, it is pretty beat up, so this one definitely needs some DIY magic, starting with the seat. The seat was cracked into two different pieces. It looked like it'd been sort of shoddily repaired with the piece of wood behind with some screws going through. I would repair that either by drilling in and doweling through, kind of like we did in the last video on the DIY spool legs. That is a bit of a higher skill level. That's like my dad's skill level. But if you're like me and you're still learning about construction and you have a lesser DIY skill level, I would get some flat metal plates and screw those into the back to offer some strength and to reattach that. It's not ideal. The seat does lift up, so you would see that plate on the back still. However, for the most part, that lid would sit down and you wouldn't see the plates behind. So that would definitely be a way to get this back in one piece and to offer some strength to it. I would definitely put some wood glue in the seam as well to offer even more strength. Another issue on this piece, one of the hooks was broken off. I might do some research to see if I can match the existing hooks with a replacement. However, it is unlikely that you would find exactly the same hook, so I would probably end up replacing all 4 hooks. If I could find something antique and brass, that would be ideal. If I couldn't get antique brass hooks, I might consider getting solid brass hooks and aging them myself, either with a vinegar and salt mixture or with a brass aging fluid. They make those as well, just to give it a nice authentic aged patina. If I couldn't find either of those and I had to end up with hooks that were like stainless steel or chrome, I would probably spray paint them with an oil rub bronze spray paint just to give that kind of like dirty metal color. Next issue on this piece is all the little carvings. Some of them are coming off, some of them are missing entirely. There's a couple different ways that you could go about doing this depending on the look that you're going for. The first thing that came to mind for me was the fireplace here in the studio that we just sanded down and did some repairs on as well. Even though it has some holes in it and it's missing some of the molding pieces, I decided to go in that direction entirely by leaving the wood really raw. So I think that could be a really nice choice on this hall tree as well, if you're willing to put in the time to sand it down back to a natural wood finish. If I went with this method, I would definitely sand down those little molding pieces by themselves before I reattach them with wood glue. Reattaching them beforehand and then hitting them with a bunch of vibration and friction is probably not the best way to get those to adhere. And then again, like I did on the mantle behind me, and as I do on most pieces that I stain, I would go over with a dark paste wax to finish things off. I really like using the tinted paste wax. It doesn't give too much color actually, and I was kind of disappointed at that when I first picked it up because I was thinking it was going to tint the wood a little bit more. But what it does really nicely is that it settles into all the little cracks and holes and makes those dark. And that sort of gives a really nice highlight and shadow effect that brings out all the shapes of the wood, especially on the carvings. Another alternative for this piece piece rather than sanding it down would be to paint it. I don't always love the aesthetic of painting pieces like this because it can tend to go a little bit like chalk paint farmhouse. However, I think this would be amazing to paint if you would put it in a space where it was painted the same color as the walls. For instance, if you had like a nice dark green entry, dark blue, black, or even like a white or cream entry, painting it to just blend in with the wall and feel really integrated, I think would give a nice built-in look to the space and create some dimension and layering within that monochromatic scheme. I'm not sure if this is still on trend, but I really like the look that we've seen in recent years of the walls and the trim being painted the same color and how you get that dimension and how it feels a little bit more contemporary because everything is the same color. And I think the same rule would apply to this piece as well. Haul tree, thrift flip diagnosed, check mark, moving on. The next piece I saw that I thought was super unique was this mirrored and glass table. Something about the mirror and the glass and the brass feels very opulent, and they're materials that are really nice, but they can read a little bit 80s, right? This piece looks very commercial, like it came out of a store maybe, but the combination of these materials could feel really opulent, so it was definitely eye-catching and unique. Right away, some problems that I'm seeing with this piece, there's kind of like a cardboard, particle board type backing on it. That looks cheap and unfinished, so we'd have to resolve that. I also think the piece would look a lot better if it were sitting up on some legs. Something about the height that it's sitting at now and the way that it's sitting on the floor feels very storefront to me, and I think that putting it on some legs would make it feel a little bit more residential appropriate. So my first thought for diagnosing this piece is, oh, maybe it would be nice to do a wallpaper treatment on the back, maybe a cool print, but something about the wallpaper and the glass and the mirror together would feel very like Liberace, over the top, glamorous, opulent, which maybe that's your vibe and maybe that would be cool. For me, I think it would be better to do a little bit of juxtaposition by introducing some natural wood tones into this piece. So I might look for like a veneer plywood or something on the back that has a nice wood grain and replace that cardboard backing with wood. I think the masculine earthiness of wood and the kind of glossy glamour of the glass and the mirror would be a nice contrast. And while we're at it, I think we should build a wood base for this to sit up on, maybe with some little legs, just something really squared off to match the lines of the rest of the piece. Maybe I'm just high on the natural wood moment after my mantle here, but I think leaving this pretty natural would add to that juxtaposition by keeping this feeling very raw in contrast to the really finished look of the mirror. I think this piece could be really cool as a console table in an entryway, or maybe kind of as a buffet in a dining space with some pretty dishware put in the open glass shelving. I find this piece totally unique and fascinating. Let me know what your ideas are. Drop them in the comments down below. I'm really curious to hear what you would do with this piece. The next curiosity that I came across was this metal floor lamp. It has this kind of odd organic curve shape on the way up and then this curlicue thing on the top. Personally, the curlicue thing is not my thing. It reminds me of like the Curls font circa 2005. However, I think the shape of the rest of the lamp is actually quite interesting. It feels a lot like what we've been seeing the past couple of years with these kind of organic shaped sofas and mirrors. So on this piece, I would take off the little curlicue thing and replace it with a standard lamp harp. I would probably put a drum shade on it, although you know I'm liking those kind of 90s pleated shades at the moment, so that could be cool on this as well. The sort of distressed black finish is not bad as is, but I think it would probably do better just to be in a solid matte black, so I would spray it black. And I think this would be really beautiful in a living room with some kind of other organic shaped things. That's not really the style that I'm going for in my space, so this wouldn't be something that I would pick up personally. However, I think for spaces that have kind of a 70s architecture to them, or that are incorporating more of that kooky, eclectic style, this could be really cool. Next up is this little wire mesh metal organizer thing. I can tell by the font that this came from our lovely friend Ray Dunn. This was also priced at 20 bucks, which is like way more than I'd want to spend on it. But apparently there are Ray Dunn collectors and enthusiasts out there, so I'm guessing Goodwill priced this item higher because they saw that font and were like, cha-ching! But yeah, I would wait it out and hope that this item is still there when it goes 50% off. However, I really like this wire mesh look. I like the practicality of it. I have a couple of authentically vintage wire baskets like this. I have one in my kitchen, one in my studio, and I love the way that that looks, and I think that you could achieve a similar look with this piece. A couple simple things that I would do with this to get it there. First of all, I would spray it in an oil rub bronze spray paint. There's this one particular shade that I've been using in a couple areas of my house. I used it on the little foot rail in my kitchen. It says oil rub bronze, but it definitely seems like more of a dirty metallic black to me. I think that would be fantastic on this piece just to give it a little bit more texture and lose that like factory made flatness of the black finish. After that, you could get a little bit more fancy with sort of distressing this piece. I don't always love a distressing thing, but I have had some luck rubbing pieces with like burnt sienna, a little bit of orange, just to give it that kind of rusty finish. And then finally, I would go in on the flat areas with the little words with a chalk paint so that you could write and label them yourself with chalk. Feels a lot more vintage, a lot more customizable, so you keep the function without it feeling so cookie cutter. Moving on to the second location, I had to dig a little bit harder for good finds on this one, and there were a couple items that almost had me fooled, but I had to look really closely. You know that since I work at the REISSUED, since I thrift all the time, that I'm very picky when it comes to certain items. And so I want to give you some warning signs to look for so that you don't get duped into a mediocre thrift flip trap. The first trap was this black bird cage for $15. I've been seeing a lot of bird cages around in thrift stores lately, and I actually think it would be really cool to do some of these hanging from the ceiling in my atrium space, especially when I have that wall of windows between the entry and the atrium. I think I'm going to want a lot of height in that space so that you can look through the windows and see some cool things hanging down. You know that space has kind of a conservatory vibe, so the more plants the better. So I thought if I could get some really interesting bird cages and put plants in them, it would be a nice way to add sort of a Victorian conservatory feel, but also keep it really modern and fresh with the lines of that space. So I definitely was considering this bird cage, but I didn't go with it for one main reason. The base on this is plastic. I think this is an actual bird cage that could be used, so if you have a bird at home, this would be a great aesthetic choice that's also practical. However, with the plastic on the bottom, it just kind of killed it for me. You could make this work. I haven't tried this myself, but I think if you were to go in with one of those sort of like hammered metal finish spray paints, it might give a little bit more texture on the plastic that would lose that super shiny, smooth finish. However, I've seen enough bird cages in my thrifting journey lately that I think it's just better to wait this one out. The next trap was this wood little chessboard you turned over, and I think it was backgammon or something on the other side. I love the aesthetic of this, the sort of mix of wood tones. That's very me. I think something like this would be fun on a tabletop or even rested on a coffee table in a living room space. It just adds some kind of texture and warmth and interest, aside from its usefulness as a game. However, upon closer inspection, this appears to be a really thin wood veneer that's over some sort of particle board situation. You can often see where the veneer is splitting apart a bit at the corners. That's always something to look for. I'm not anti-veneer entirely as long as it's in good shape, but in this case it was really scratched up, and so it would need to be sanded down and refinished, and in this case the veneer is so thin that you would not be able to sand it down at all, so this is definitely a pass for me. And then the final close call trap was this particle board looking trunk. You know I love a vintage look trunk. I have many of them in my house. I find them to be useful and really aesthetic as well. The thing that almost always makes the difference between me purchasing a trunk and leaving it at the store is the actual function of the piece. So from a distance, this trunk looked great. I kind of like the particle board look. It gives a more industrial look to this same kind of trunk style that we've seen before. However, upon closer inspection, I realized that one of the latches that closes the piece was missing, and that for me is an absolute must. I always want my trunks to have all the handles intact and all the hardware intact, because in addition to being an aesthetic item, I do want these to function. I use the handles when I put these up on the shelves. I need them to close to make sure they don't open up and have everything fall out. So this one was a no-go for me. I couldn't think of a way to repair it, so we're gonna leave that one at the store, despite it being 50% off and only $10. A couple of items that I wanted to mention in the store that were pretty cool but didn't really move me specifically. First was this light fixture. It was at 50% off. It was $7. I have a couple light fixtures actually that are similar like this that I might build something around for my entryway. This is a great fixture because it does have that two-tiered thing. You could get a lot of bulbs in there and it would produce a lot of light. If I were in need of a one-off fixture for my house, I might get this piece and remove all those little glass cylinders, spray paint it either a matte black or a brassy gold, depending on the look that I was going for in the room. Replace the bulbs with some nice round bulbs, kind of like the ones in the fixture behind me. Personally would not be a fan of the filament bulbs and the light that they give off, so I would go with something that's more opaque. And then I would either source or create a structure to go around the whole thing, either a giant drum shade, maybe some sort of barrel piece, maybe some sort of sculptural, like wood, geometric looking thing. We've seen fixtures like this a lot in kind of a mass-produced way, so I would definitely want mine to be a little bit more unique. I'm still brainstorming how I want my lights to look in my entry, so I don't have a fully fleshed out idea for this piece, but I wanted to point out that for the price, it was 50% off and $4, so this would be a great base fixture to work from if you were looking to create something cool and artistic and unique for your space. Another piece that was kind of cool but wasn't really fleshed out in my mind was this sewing machine base. We've seen a lot of vintage sewing machine bases like this before to make tables. I did have the thought that this might be cool as a bathroom vanity in a small bathroom if you had a bit of an industrial kind of look, if you could let the pipes below be exposed. I think that in a small bathroom it's often a good idea to have a base like this to see as much of the floor as possible and keep the space feeling as big as possible. However, depending on what you need for the room, I know in my personal bathroom that we're going to be renovating soon, I need a lot more concealed storage in that space, and so I'm definitely gonna go with more of a cabinet or a drawer structure, and something like this just wouldn't provide enough storage for me. All the same, it looked pretty cool and I had to point it out to you guys. One little side note before we hit our final diagnosis, I saw this really interesting glass piece of art. It looks sort of like an x-ray of a flower to me, and I wanted to point it out not as like a DIY diagnosis moment, but just as a question. Do we like this? Sometimes I see an item when I'm thrifting and I'm like, at first I really hate it, and then the longer I look at it, I'm like, ooh, that's actually kind of cool. I couldn't see myself incorporating this anywhere in my space. However, I thought the idea of the kind of x-ray flowers felt a little bit morose, but also kind of graphic. So I just had to ask, do we love this or do we hate this? Let me know in the comments. And final DIY diagnosis of the day is this drop leaf table. I had been around the store multiple times looking for cool items, and this one just totally passed me by, partly because it folds down so small, which I thought was really amazing. This piece was like maybe a foot across when it was all folded down, but then when the table folded out, it was like 6 feet across. And I thought, wow, that would be so practical for like a workspace or like a craft room. My studio is a little bit too far gone at this time to do something like that, but I did think, wow, that would be a really great solution for a room like this. So with this piece, both sides fold out, and then there's little legs below that fold out in a 90-degree angle to hold up those extensions. So I just love the design and the function of this piece. Couple things upon further inspection. This piece totally appeared to be solid wood. It almost had me fooled, but upon further inspection, you could see that this was veneer. You could tell by the way that the grain line was running along the outside, and then there was one area that was damaged and that veneer was peeling up, and you could see that particle board underneath. Not ideal, but in this case, I think it could work. It keeps it a little bit more lightweight if you had to be portable with this. So to use this piece as is, I would get some wood glue and glue that little chipping section down. Then I would go in with my heat gun and remove all the varnish on this. A lot of it is just peeling and flaking off already. It reminds me of the way that the finish was peeling on my computer desk when I got that, and the heat gun took that right off super easily. Again, I'm feeling the natural wood look, especially for a really utilitarian piece like this. So I would probably leave this natural and then wax it. However, you could go in and paint it or stain it or do any number of things depending on the style of the space. However, if you wanted to take things to the next level, if this piece were still hanging around when it goes 50% off, I might get this piece just for the hardware and to use as a template to build my own table. Again, the veneer and the particle board construction doesn't necessarily bother me in this case, but the legs are a little bit small, the whole thing is a little bit rickety, and so I think that you could build a better version of this with a chunkier wood base, with a solid wood top, but still use all the hardware, the really long piano hinges, the screws, the little smaller hinges underneath. Those are things that if you were to go to the hardware store, it's likely that you might end up spending more than you would on this whole piece anyway, and so why not take this piece home, use it as a template to build your own piece and incorporate all that same hardware, save a little bit of money, and then use this table as raw materials for a different project. Alright everybody, that is it for this episode of DIY Diagnosis. Again, if you like this style of video, be sure to hit the like button and let me know in the comments that you want to see more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.